when they were talking about the calls, the people getting that, weren't getting hooked up with therapy. I can't tell you how often that happens. As a community provider, we get people that come in and have never got any outpatient therapy. And when I ask why, they're like, I don't know, they said I probably needed it, but, and didn't really get hooked up with anything. And so I'm in the same boat as you. I feel the same kind of frustration. A woman back there talked about not knowing stroke. Well, try to have aphasia. People don't ever say the word. It's like the big elephant in the room. Nobody says, oh, this person has aphasia, so that when they first start to hear it, they can't really own it. And so I do think that, making sure that people know what they're dealing with is important. My most important thing that I want to get across to you today is that, and I'll kind of combine two things here, but how many are nurses? Wow, I love nurses. My mom's a nurse. Your role in rehab, how many PTs? OTs? Speech? Where are my people? Recreation therapy. Saw RT somewhere. So I really want people to realize that even though there's not any speech therapists in the room, that I saw a hand go up, that you have as much control and ability to help somebody meet their communication goals as we do helping somebody meet their motor goals. And so just as you may give people a recommendation to only use the right hand or to walk somewhere with a walker and not use the wheelchair, we're going to support those goals, and we need you supporting the communication goals. And I want everybody to realize that rehab is in the power of each of us, and it helps us to think about what we were saying before this session started, is who is the person? When you initially see somebody in acute care, in the hospital, or even in rehab, we make a lot of assumptions. We look at somebody like this, and we say, and many times the neurosurgeon also says from the outside of the room, in front of a whole bunch of family members, this woman is widowed, her family lives out of state, she's had a massive bleed, she will, and of course all in mumbo jumbo, but basically she's going to live in a nursing home the rest of her life. This is traditional medical model to see this list of all the problems, all the things that are wrong with somebody, right? When people give me a folder and say, hey, can you see this person for me if I was doing PRN, coverage for somebody, the list of problems are all you see. You see what they have, what their diagnosis is, what they can't do versus what they can do. I love that one slide with ELF was what you can do versus what you can't do and why that's important. Well, this is the same person. Granted, her hair's in a little better shape and it's got a her scarf or makeup on, but it is the same person. So my emphasis on programming with people with aphasia, with stroke rehab, TBI rehab, is to find out who the person is. It is so important that people understand that this isn't just a 70-year-old with a hemorrhagic bleed. This is a grandmother to 10. This is a mother to 3. This is a retired nurse. This is somebody who volunteers 3 different places. So just as you might, as a physical therapist, look at somebody and say, okay, well, what were they doing before their stroke? Because those are the things that are going to be important to them. I don't know if you saw my very attractive boot. It's very pretty. But I got that boot on my first day in Portugal, where I went to speak at the International Aphasia Conference and quickly learned about medicine in Portugal when I broke my 4th and 5th metatarsal pretty badly. Lucky I'm married to a PA in orthopedics, so he was able to say, we're not going to the hospital, put a boot on it, get some crutches. And then even nicer enough to go visit all the places we were supposed to visit as my foot was resting up and showing me on my phone all of the beautiful places I was missing. Anyway, my point being is I went to the foot doctor when I returned to the United States, and my first question is, when can I run? And he's like, okay, like walking would be good, let's start there. And I think it was really telling for him to have kind of an idea of what does this woman need to get back to doing? What is part of her life? What is her passion? What is important to her? And so the same with Joan here, who not just is a snazzy dresser and a woman who loves St. Patrick's Day, but this is also my mom. So I was always very passionate about knowing who patients are and understanding the power of rehabilitation because I'm a speech pathologist. And I have been one of those blessed people that worked along the entire continuum of care. Did you see how I did that? I was like, I worked along the entire continuum of care. And when I started in rehab back in the dark ages, you were able to see someone for years. I mean, inpatient stays were like 3 weeks. Then they got transferred to rehab, which was like a year. We celebrated birthdays and all kinds of stuff. And then they went to outpatient. Then they went to day treatment. So as I aged and grade, what happened was this continuum of care that was like this started to go like this. What was most frustrating to me about that was that what we knew about the brain and about neuroplasticity was going like this. And I mean in that kind of last 10 to 15 years, the things that we learned. So we were understanding that the continuum of care was being reduced, our options for rehabilitation with people were being reduced, and yet the opportunities and the potential was going like this. Which is a lot of the reason why I quit my really well-paying job at Duke to become a nonprofit director of the Triangle Aphasia Project, much to the dismay of my husband, who I assured him would only be a couple years of having no paycheck. But, you know, I'm happy, and that's all he should care about. So, thank you. You can call him on the phone. What I also realized is that we were getting a kind of bad rep. And I can talk about this because there's none of my peers in the room in the speech therapy, but we had, you know, that office that was up, you know, in a kind of a closet way up in the back. And we would take the person with aphasia or a person that had communication challenges, and we would bring them up the big hall past the OT gym, which is a little smaller than PT, but really nice still. And we go, hey, we're going to go back here where we do our magic in our room for an hour. And then we come back and we hand them over to their spouse or their caregiver, and we say, oh, they did a really good job. And here's some worksheets, okay? I'll tell you, when my mom got her first worksheet and threw it in my face and said, what am I, 10? I'm like, yeah, we shouldn't be doing worksheets because it had nothing to do with the life of the person. So I was always kind of the rebel in that area. I would come down that ramp, and they're like, what are you doing here? What did you hear someone choking or something? Why'd you come down here? I'm like, no, I came down here because this is rehab. We cannot separate a person's arms from their legs from their mouth. Because I'm listening to you give directions to this individual who has comprehension problems, and then you're upset because he's not making gains in therapy. But here, let me give you a couple cute little aphasia tricks, and you're going to be able to get more from your patient. Besides the fact is that we were learning about neuroplasticity, so that's what I want to talk about. What we decided is that let's get out of the workbooks and let's talk philosophy, because as I've already mentioned, not just stress styles changed, but also therapy changed. And I think that speech therapists became more like you, like the PTs, the OTs, and nurses who tried to find out about the person's life. That two broken foots, if you have two individuals, no, I had a point. If you had two individuals who both had a broken foot, their plan is different, right? Now, maybe their surgical or splinting or pain management might have been the same, but their program is different because their goals are different. The speech pathologist had to get out of the mindset of we got to work on nouns. I don't know who ever thought it was a good idea for someone to go clock, wall, rug. Nobody names nouns. That's not something that we do. So people in the early 2000s got together, this group of physiologists who I am proud to be a member of now, and certainly they're all my mentors and much, much older than me. But they all talk about the life participation approach. And I want to go, this is what PT and OT and Rec were kind of always doing, was learning about their person and finding out what supports they need. So the life participation model, married with the International Classification of Functioning and the World Health Organization and the AFROM, is just saying it's more than their impairment. We all, guess what? They know they can't talk. They know, for the most part, unless you got a really, involved individual, that when they go to say something, it's coming out wrong. They already know that. So we need to be providing the same kind of feedback and training and teaching them about their rehabilitation and encouraging them to have ownership of this rehabilitation journey. Why? Not just because it'll help them get better, but because we don't have enough time anymore. We are not honestly, the speech therapist may have 5-6 sessions with somebody. It takes us 5 sessions to evaluate somebody. It shouldn't. It takes 5 sessions to evaluate, but it shouldn't. So we need to look and give that person the empowerment that they hold the key to the rehab, not us. We, speech therapists now have become like PT and OT, where we're coaches. We're going to help them get through this. And we weren't the only ones talking about it. These are some of my favorite. Does anyone recognize any of these books? These are a lot of the books that I recommend families start reading. My Stroke of Insight is the one they all run to, and they say, oh, it's such a great book. I'm like, yeah, it's a great book. Watch the TED Talk. It's much shorter. And I look at Stronger After Stroke. Look at some of these that look at pragmatic changes and understand that the therapy isn't going to happen in somebody's office. It's going to happen in their life. Somebody was talking about that room and can they make it to the bathroom? It's much more than that. Can they go back to volunteering? Can they, read to their grandchildren? What are the things that we can help them do? So the LPAA, or the life participation approach, got us out of just worksheets, and then we married it with what we know about what's happening with neuroplasticity. Anyone recognize this? Young Frankenstein? So we have gone from a very isolated, well, if you have damage here, then you're going to have this type of aphasia, and therefore we will treat with this type of approach, to, thank God, you know what? The brain is remarkable. And the ability for it to change is at our level right now. We don't even know what it's possible to do, right? I always say, like, if I have no right hemisphere, I literally may have had a lobectomy or hemispherectomy that I wasn't aware of, but I have no artistic talent. I have no musical talent. But if I wanted to learn the piano, could I? Sure. It would take a lot of time and probably someone Velcroing me to the seat, but we can learn new things. And it's a lot about what are the techniques to learn those new things, and then what is the motivation to learn it? Because that's another thing that we talk about. This is one of the 2 words you're not allowed to say in the Triangle Aphasia Project, 4 walls. Does anyone know the other word that you might not be able to say? Oh, no, maintains, I guess, okay. It begins with a C and ends with apostrophe T. You guys all owe me $1. So I have a jar at the Triangle Aphasia Project called that jar, and if somebody says that word, they put $1 in. And the reason is, as we'll talk about a little bit, it has a lot to do with mindset and what you believe. But the other thing is that we, according to our patients, are the experts. So if we tell them to do something, they are going to listen to us. So if we need to discharge them, what do they often hear you saying? Even though you might not have intended to say it, when you say, I'm going to need to, you had the 3 times a week and the 2 times a week, and now 1 time, but, we'll see you. Bye. What do they hear? You're done. Yeah. Oftentimes, I've heard people come in my office and say, my therapist told me I would not make any more improvement. This is as far as I'm going to get. They told me I reached a plateau. Well, you know what? Dancers reach plateaus and musicians reach plateaus with one trainer, and they go and do something else. It just means it's time to mix it up. But we can't be oblivious to the fact that we have restrictions, that the insurance is only telling us we can go so far. So from the very beginning, the individual that has had a brain injury or stroke needs to know their rehab isn't up to that continuum. That continuum is just like a training. Has anyone ever ran or started a program like a half marathon or couch to 5K, anything like that? Okay, gotcha. So once you reach the 5K or once you're on the ability to train, and people will often say, it's the training, it's not the race. That's what we got to start talking to our patients about. We need to say, we're here to help you learn as much as you can about rehabilitation. We have to empower you to learn and to keep finding out and to keep trying new things so that when you don't have us here anymore, that you're still awesome and you're still making progress. It's, again, that coaching mentality. So what it makes us is not just coaches, but trainers. We're going to learn how we can actually be trainers of cells. And I've always wanted to be a trainer. I have a secret crush on Jillian Michaels. I always want somebody to say, get down and give me 20. I mean, that's what we get to do. We get to say, okay, brain cell, let's show you how to do things. Because we know that the brain can change. We know that neurons can be rewired. And we don't just know that because of guessing anymore. We actually have proof. And there's two stories I just want to share real quick. And some of you probably know this story. I see some PTs nodding already that you guys might know the story. But this is Pedro. And I think Pedro liked the Beatles because he had a son, Paul, and a son, George. And he was done. But he was a widow, and he was 65 when he had a stroke. And it was pretty massive. And after about 4 weeks in a New York hospital, they said it's time for him to go home. And they said, but I don't think he's going to be able to go home. He's probably going to go to a nursing home. And his sons, who just happened to be like a doctor and a neuroscientist, said, well, no, we'll take him home. And so they brought him home, and he loved to garden, so they would bring him out in the garden, but he couldn't walk. So they put him on the floor. I know it sounds awful and it's cruel, but they said if that's how babies learn to walk, maybe that's how an individual was. Now all the PTs are going, oh my God, what happened? But the point being is they made him start over. And they said, if you want something, you got to go and get it. And if you want to say something, you have to tell me. He was very aphasic. He had right hemipresis. And they had him, but he was also a writer. So he would sit at his typewriter. For you younger people, there's like a thing with ribbon, kind of like a computer. And he would put his hands over the letter. Instead of doing this, which is what we get really, really good at, right? He would do this, and he would take his finger, and he would push down on the finger. And he would push down. Can you imagine how laborious that was? But that's what made him be able to go back to writing, go back to teaching, go back to walking, all of those things. And he died, I think it was 9 years later, on a mountain. He was hiking. And so they did an autopsy because one of the sons was a neuroscientist, looked in and found that the left hemisphere was completely atrophied. I mean, just shriveled. And so they were like, what in God's name? How did this happen? Which, of course, they had assumed that most of the functions of the left side were taken over by the right side. And that was kind of initial proof that neuroplasticity is something we really could bank on. The other is my favorite story about Donald Hebb, who was another scientist who basically wanted to prove that there was changes that could actually occur in the neurons themselves. And what he did was he said, hey, honey, I'm going to bring my work home with me. I happen to work with mice. But what he did was he had a group of mice that he left at the lab, and he had a group of mice that he brought home. The ones that he left at the lab, he would train them on all kinds of mazes. He would put him in a maze. He would put the cheese or whatever. I think they like peanut butter, actually, from experience, where they were heading around and trying to find that, that snack. At home, they were left loose in the house. So following his divorce, I really think he didn't have a good marriage after that. But he brought those same rats, the ones he could find mice, he collected them and he brought them back to the lab. And he put both groups of those mice in novel mazes. Guess which mice did better? The ones that were wandering around, who had to figure things out for themselves, who had the, creativity and the innovation of not having just the same thing over and over. So he wasn't satisfied there, and he cut their little brains open and found out that it was more than it was improved, that they did better, but the dendrites had actually changed. That from one neuron to the next could communicate better because the dendrites had actually lengthened and increased in size and girth, which means that individuals, when they're stimulated, will find ways for those neurons to go through. And they called that experience-dependent neuroplasticity. And when you think about it, it just means that the experiences matter. And we got to remember that. We got to remember that to get to somebody's potential, they need to have things that are challenging, that are exciting, that are relevant. And Klein and Jones were the first people to identify this. And somehow this slide got a little out of order, so I'm going to go back to that one for a second. But so as part of experience-dependent neuroplasticity, there was two guys, Klein and Jones, who got together in 2008 and published their work on what are the 10 principles of neuroplasticity, what has to be considered if you really want the brain to change. And I want to tell you, this isn't just rehab. This is anything. This is me playing the piano. This is me wanting to learn Italian so I can go to Italy on vacation. It's got to have all of these components in them, and you have to think about them. This idea and these 10 principles, I could talk on for literally an entire course. But I want to point out a couple of the ones that we have control over and we have power over. And those are some of the ones that we've heard before. Use it or lose it. It was remarkable to me when my awesome mom suffered her stroke and lost function in the right side of her body. Her right arm was in rehab, very weak, but it was functional. It was functional like if I were going to grab, if I had a soda here, I was going to grab this. I could get it, but my hand was super weak. That's what it was like for her. It was remarkable, though, that when you put a soda there or, piece of pizza or macaroni and cheese, she's like a little kid with her food preferences, but she would grab it with this hand so quickly. I mean, within days of her stroke, her left side was becoming stronger and more powerful and coming to the rescue going, oh, this one can't do it? Here, I got it. And when you think about that, every opportunity that she had to use her right side but used her left instead made this side stronger and this side weaker. Obvious. You got the therapist in the here are going, duh, I knew that. But what I want to apply it to is the idea of communication and potential, and why it's really important for you all to remember that if you're a nurse and you're going in to see a patient who's had a stroke and is struggling for the words, don't give them the words. It's like handing them the soda with their left hand. It's the same thing. If I saw someone come in here and they were on their way to the restroom and they're struggling with a walker and I saw, oh, it looks so effortful and looks so, uncomfortable, I'm going to pick you up and carry you to the bathroom. I bet every PT in here would tackle me and go, what are you doing? We know that that person needs to be able to do it. Intrinsically, we know that muscles have to feel that the neurons have to be talked to both ways. Well, it's the same thing with communication. But when we see someone struggling for a word, what do? We give it to them. And then they get it across with one word. Like, oh, what's the matter? Your stomach hurt? They didn't say anything. I remember going to a patient's house, and this was a person who had chronic aphasia. I had met her 8 years after her stroke. Her son was in the kitchen, and she goes, just a minute. Hey, Zach. She said, hey, Zach. And he goes, you want me to get the roast out of the oven? And I went, were you guys speaking a different language? I never heard her say, get the roast out of the oven. I go, wait, Zach, how did you know she wanted you to get the roast out of the oven? Oh. I go, you can't do that because she can say it. And so I said, come on, Kim, show him. And she went, and I go, I'll help you. I'm not going to be mean. I mean, you guys don't send somebody walk into the bathroom without the walker. You give them the walker. But there's no difference between a walker and a cue. So I say, Kim, what do you want to say? Roast. Okay. And then so I write out, get the roast out of the oven, and we do it together because she got roast already. And then she writes it and she says it, and that improves it. So use it or lose it is huge because we know about learn non-use. What we don't think about is how that affects communication. What about use it and improve it? This is where constraint-induced therapies came from. This is where we said, you know what? If we keep using it, it'll get better. I had a patient one time come to me and said, Mara, I this and I this, but I this. I go, okay. I know this woman really struggled with writing. And I said, so you're telling me that you can write. This is writing, right? She said, yeah. So you're writing one word? Right. So I wrote, you're writing one word, but you can't write a whole sentence. And she said, yes. Then I owed myself $1 because I said, can't. But she said, I said, can't, this was Nancy. I said, Nancy, do you know why you can't write full sentences? And she said, no. I said, because you don't write full sentences. You don't ever write full sentences. You write single words. If I gave you a model and I supported your ability to write full sentences, you would write full sentences. Now, you might need a lot of support in the beginning, but isn't a wheelchair or a walker just a progression to a 4-point cane to a regular cane to walking without it? So we can provide those same kind of things. And then repetition matters. It's so vital for people to know that it doesn't take one time. It's going to take many, many, many times. I mentioned that I have 4 boys. My youngest wants to be LeBron James, like really, really bad, except he's 4'8". But he goes out and he plays basketball all the time. He knows he has to play and shoot and shoot and shoot over and over again. And what's really interesting from a neuroplastic standpoint is that he has an excellent 3-point shot. And we got him this Steph Curry masterclass video for Christmas. We thought he would love it. And he did. But he starts watching it and he goes, you know what I realized? My elbow's out too far. Steph says, like Steph's in his bedroom or something, Steph says, move my elbow in. So now I'm going to start shooting like that. Guess what? He missed every single shot. He'd go like this. He made the shot. It's the slightest cue, the slightest movement that he had to retrain. Now he shoots like this because he retrained, and if he goes like this, he'll miss. So it has to happen over and over again, and that's where this awesome slide that got backwards here was. When my son was much younger, I took him to the beach, and the older 3 boys are like, ha, you have to do neuroplastic experiments with mom at the beach. We got to bury dad, but, you know, you get to, because they, not really bury. God, that sounded awful. No, I meant like bury in the sand. I don't know why moms never do it, but dad's like, yeah, go ahead, bury me in the sand. Anyway, I told Zach, let's go down to the beach, and you can help mom with this experiment. I want to videotape something. And I made this little video of a sandcastle, and we had the moat. And I said, now go down and get some water and pour it into that little moat. So we went out, we poured the water, and what happened to the water? It disappeared. Was it gone? No. And many more times, the water would start to saturate a little bit. And after about the 18th time, he said, this is no fun, I'm going away. So I finished the experiment myself, which took a whole lot of time. But my point being is that when you're doing something, it's working. We just can't see it. It's happening underlying, and that neuron is speaking to the next neuron. But then if we abandon that pathway, they're not going to do it again. So we have to do it all the time. Why is this so important for me to tell you? Because every time a person communicates, it's a potential opportunity to do therapy with them. Think about it. As a nurse, does a patient ask you for pain pill or help to go to the bathroom, or do they need, assistance getting dressed? All of those things, whether you're a therapist or a nurse, they're opportunities to have a conversation and to communicate with them. Saliency is the other really important one, and I think it's more important than what we give credit for. When you're talking about saliency, it means that the brain is more apt to, well, it's not even just more apt, it only will lay down foundations and pathways of something that's important to you. It won't bother with things that are unimportant to you. Think about it. It happens to us every day where we don't really pay attention to something unless we really need to pay attention to it, right? One of my mom's first therapy sessions in occupational therapy was sitting at a table in the big gym, and she was taking nails and screws and putting those into a little medicine cup. She was making great progress on her arm and her hand, but that day she was asleep. And I mean, drool, asleep. I came in checking on her. Hey, Mom, what are you doing? And the OT said to me, I'm sorry, your mom is not participating today. I'm going to have to bring her up to her room. Okay, my first thought, being a rehab therapist for like my whole life, was, oh my God, what are they going to write in the chart? And why should I care what they're going to write in the chart? Because if they had to stop therapy early and she was non-compliant, guess what gets written in the chart? Guess what happens to Mom's rehab stay? Because how many hours is she supposed to be tolerating? 3. So I said, well, wait. Can I help out just a little? And she goes, okay, but I have another patient. I said, I get you. I got you. So I went over and I put some cold water on a washcloth and paid her back for all those early mornings when I was a teenager. And I said, come on, Mom, it's time to get up. You got to work. This is great. You can do this. And then I said, but my mom never, I don't even think she knows the difference between a nail and a screw. My dad was a serviceman, so he did all of those kind of things. She really doesn't understand this, and she doesn't really find a lot of motivation. But you know what? My mom is like, I was going to say she's religious about saying the rosary, clearly. She said the rosary every single day. She's very Catholic. I mean, she knew the mysteries and all those, like this little book that she had with her. But she would say that once or twice a day. I said, give her the rosary. I said, can I try something? And I reached in her bag and I pulled out these beads. And I put them in her hand and I said, Mom, we got to work that hand. Look at those muscles are not working. We got to talk to it. Put it in that right hand. And it was like watching The Awakening. I mean, you've seen that movie, right? Like, she was going like this, and you're struggling, and you're going, you can do it! And then her fingers start to go, and she's pushing those beads. Well, what else happened? She started praying. And she started praying out loud, and it was the first words she could say. And when it's automatic, guess what happens? They just float out of there. I mean, it's not only the 4-letter words that float out of our patient's mouth, it's also, the Hail Mary 10 times in a row. So it needs to be relevant. We need to find out what these patients want to be able to do, and then we use that stuff for fodder for programming and intervention. This is a chart that is in the Stronger After Stroke book, which I find just such an easy way of looking at our programming with people. That what they are doing and what they want to get back to doing is vitally important for our rehab because of that saliency piece. So after my mom was discharged from inpatient rehab, she was going to go home for outpatient day treatment 3 times a week, 1 hour, which was really, let's give it 45 minutes, right, of PT, OT, and speech. How much work needs to be done if she's going to get her communication back? And her, for that matter, her mobility and her right hand movement. She needed to do a lot. She needed to make everyday activities therapy all the time, because that is what was going to make her better. So I looked kind of very similar to, again, that whole compass idea of connecting her with the community, and said, let's see if we can find anything where she can continue to work that hand. And I called St. Michael's, which is the church in Cary near our house, and they happen to have a rosary club, like a rosary club. They made rosaries for the missions and for the confirmation students. I called, I said, can my mom join? She said, sure, that'd be fine. So she came in. Now my mom has aphasia, so I sat with her the first time, and as part of her communication support team, trained those people, those women that were sitting around making rosaries, to learn about aphasia, because every person that I get to educate about aphasia, I'm happy. But also, I got to teach them how to communicate with her, so that they wouldn't be filling in her words, that she'd have an opportunity to ask questions and have conversation with them. Then she was working on her right hand, and she started beating those. And in the beginning I was with her, and then I dropped her off every Tuesday morning for about 2 hours. That's free therapy. You can't even pay for that kind of therapy. It's real, it's passionate. She felt like she was doing something. So when I think about the neurons that made the pathway, those are the ones that did it. When she came home, she washed my table and did other things with her right hand. And again, couldn't do it initially without the support of using her left arm to help. But doing that was what helped get her closer and closer to her goals. So remember that just as empowering as your role in therapy is everybody that has interaction with the person, because life is therapy. Therapy is not the person's life. And the problem is they believe that. If you listen to somebody talk about when they get discharged from therapy, it's painful. They feel dumped. They feel like they're not going to make any more improvement. It's the whole reason why we need to make sure that we are viewed as somebody who is helping them get started on their journey. And that maybe we'll be there every year when Medicare reapproves them, but we're there to help give them support and guidance, and not just that one little intervention. So the other segue, or the other point, when you look at something and you say the word, you didn't mean to say it. The other piece that everyone talks about is motivation. And there's a lot of really good research right now on self-determination theory and about intrinsic motivation. But what it comes down to is mindset. And some of the emotional neuroplastic things and if you look at that one book that I said, The Power of Neuroplasticity by Helmstetter, that book talks about you can have all of the skill sets and all of the resources to get you better. But if it's not up here, if you don't believe it's going to happen, you won't. So if my, 4 foot something, I would have to give him, he's closer to my height now, but let's say 5 foot something son goes out for the JV basketball team and says, I'm not going to make it. I'm not. Look at these guys. They're so much bigger than me. I don't have a chance of making it. Is he going to make it? No. It is really true that what we put out in the universe comes back to us. And what we need to remember is that by saying something, it's setting that brain up. They even talk about there's a difference between really positive people and people that tend to be kind of pessimists. I have a sister that is kind of on that thing. And you realize that eventually that pathway is sealed. So that when you hear news, you're either that's that character on Saturday Night Live, or yes, Debbie Downer. Or you're like, well, we can find a way around that. And so neuroplasticity isn't just about the motor pieces. It's also about what's up here. And what we talk about is that dignity of struggle. And I believe so much in this, the dignity of struggle, is that by allowing somebody to kind of fight for the word, or to ask you for help for the word, or to make it from here to the bathroom and struggle with their walker, is saying, I know you've got this. Yes, it's nice when you see somebody who's struggling to open the door for them, but it's also nice to say, do you want me to open the door for you? Or do you got this yourself? So when you're communicating with someone who's obviously struggling with communication, it's okay to say, I see that you're struggling. That must be really frustrating, but I'm not going anywhere. How can I help? Or can I write it for you? Or would you like, is there another way you can say it? Believe me, they know, again, that they have aphasia. So struggling just tells them, I believe in you. The other is that every opportunity is a communicative opportunity. So, and it's hard, believe me. I mean, my mom still has, mild aphasia. And when she's struggling to get those words out, and how many of you have small children? When you're ready to go out and they're tying their shoe and it's really important that they learn how to tie their shoe, but you're like, oh my God, I gotta go, come on, bunny, ear, round, whatever, just let's go. One of the things that we have to realize, if we allow them to take that opportunity to make that bunny ear, to go around, it's been years, so I don't really remember. Do they go around a bush or something? What do they go under the tree or something? I just was told to tie my shoe and let's go. So parenting has changed a little bit. But even more, and this is what I want PT and OT to get really excited about, and RT as well, and even find some ways that we could collaborate on research with people in inpatient rehab, because we are learning not just about regular neuroplasticity, but we're learning about mirror neurons. Have you guys heard about mirror neurons? It is the most exciting discovery in neuroplasticity in the last 10 years. And it means that we don't even have to be doing something to be able to have the prefrontal cortex set up a motor plan for us to do that. That's crazy. That means if somebody's standing outside of that door and they're bouncing a basketball, without even holding a basketball, if they put an fMRI cap on you and they tried to figure out what's lighting up, it would be that prefrontal cortex setting up the pattern for using your hand to bounce that ball. They have a great video. If you look up mirror neurons on YouTube, there's a great video of an experiment at Duke with a monkey on a treadmill. That's kind of just funny anyway, to watch a monkey on a treadmill. But he's getting the program from Japan, and it's just, he's watching it, and he's doing what? So it's a very cool video. But it's what we do how many times have you taken a picture of somebody, and what do you do when you go, here? You smile, right? Have you fed a baby? I don't think you're eating the pureed pea. Ah, psych! That's delicious. It's because our brain knows that's what has to be done. What I think is amazing about this is, what if, while people are sitting in those, what do we say, 3 hours of therapy, that means how many hours are they awake not getting therapy? And maybe being pushed from one place to another, being given their meds without, asking for them, or all those things, and then having no visitors, or having visitors that are talking around the person. If instead we talked about, and even showed them like iPad videos of them walking or of them talking, they'd be seeing the things that they're trying to learn. And I guess Johns Hopkins is beating us to us, because I saw this video and I actually, poor Barbara, I was like, can I add one more slide? Because somebody put this up on Facebook, and it was a nurse friend of mine who works in an ICU unit. And she said that this came around in one of the nurses, where they have that, what is that machine called where they do the, it's like when you lay in bed, it's an elliptical kind of foot thing, right? What they use to keep boy DVTs and to keep people active and moving. So this woman is in the ICU at Johns Hopkins, and they are projecting a screen up there, like that Peloton bike that costs like $7,000. They put like the vision of where they're riding, and she's pedaling along. I mean, talk about like getting the pathway. That will definitely improve the pathway more than going, okay, just 5 more minutes, which you know we've all done. Just like a trainer tells you, only 5 more. You're like, I've heard that before. So obviously we talked about neuroplasticity is not just in your head, and this is not hooked up to the internet, so not working. But what I'm going to ask, and since I'm running low on time, this was supposed, that little white screen is supposed to be a video on mindset. And I thought I was a neuroplasticity geek, but apparently I'm a mindset geek because I've watched some videos from Carol Dweck, who does, has anyone heard of her? She does work in education, and her work in education is about how when kids believe something, that will be their potential. So have you ever been told you're not a math person? Oh yeah, every speech therapist could say they've been told they're not a math person. Or they just really just stink at math. That what she's finding is that you can actually change people's mindset, and there are people that have either a positive mindset, what they call a growth mindset, and there's people that have a fixed mindset. And the only difference is that when you have a growth mindset, it means that if a challenge comes at you, you say, ooh, how can I get around this? If you have a fixed mindset, you go, oh, that's really hard. I have teenagers, so I have fixed mindsets all over my house. They're like, so much work. So the idea of kind of infiltrating the rehab with this positive programming, with people saying, I can do this, I can get better. Looking at sufficiency is not the same as potential. Just because someone does something doesn't mean that they did it to what they could potentially do. And if we teach them to do it to what they can potentially do, they'll get better faster. It is the power of self-talk, and Dr. Helmstetter in that Power of Neuroplasticity talks about how if we follow just these affirmations, now I know you're going, she went from clinical to woohoo, but I really, really believe this. I think that if people go and say, I can do it, and just say it. I know this is hard, but I can do it. And change people's wording to, it's challenging, or I'll try, will make a difference in their recovery. Kind of reminds me of Stuart. But we control so much of this in rehabilitation. We are the ones that can inject this positivity and this hope. I do a lot of work with the Brain Tumor Center at Duke, and one of the things that keeps hitting me is their name is hope. I mean, their whole tagline is, at Duke there is hope. In the Brain Tumor Center there is hope. Many of those people die. Every year I do the run, and they have memorial t-shirts of all the people that died. It's not about, when you give somebody hope, it doesn't mean you're telling them that they're going to live forever. I could get hit by a bus, God forbid, walking out, outside today. But you have to give hope, and you can't tell people that this is their destiny, or it is their destiny. And they really rely on this. So whether you have to help them do a vision board. I had a client who said to me, I put up every single thing I wanted to do. I want to drive again, so I put a picture of my car in my room. I used to picture going from my bed to that door, and I just pictured it over and over with walking to that door. And did that make a difference? I think so. And then we have to be the ones that are the coaches. We are the ones who, and I'm clearly a Duke fan, like Coach K would do, is he doesn't go out and play the game for him. I mean, poor Back, he probably couldn't play the game for him, but he calls his little one and dones over, and he says, come on in, I'm going to tell you what to do, and then I'm going to send you back out. And then he gets mad, and he calls him back in. He says, you weren't doing this. Here, let me try this. You got this. Let's do this. It's the same with what we're supposed to do. But we don't just do it in inpatient. We do it as they go back out into the community. And we find those opportunities for them in the community to access therapeutic recreation, therapeutic volunteerism, therapeutic leisure. Our clients at the Triangle Aphasia Project recently did an entire summer program where our clients were the tutors for kids who have learning challenges. They were reading. You know what? The empathy that was built in that room for people with disabilities, and then back to empowered somebody to understand I have purpose and I can go on, makes all the difference in the world. So, I don't know. Who's ready to take some of these neuroplastic things and apply them into your therapies? I'm just honored to be able to have an opportunity to tell you what we're doing at TAP and some of the philosophy that you could be using in your programming. So that's TAP and that's me, and if you have any questions, let me know. Thank you.